happiness is letting go of everything you think your life is supposed to be and celebrating everything that it really is. I just like that so much because it's kind of training yourself to adapt to what's real.
Welcome to Aging in Style with me, Lori Williams. I'm an optimist by nature, and I believe you can follow your dreams at any age. My grandmother's journey with dementia ignited a passion in me to work with seniors. I've spent the past 13 years learning about seniors and aging. In my mid-50s, I followed my own dream and founded my company, where I use my expertise to help seniors locate housing and resources. On this podcast, we cover all aspects of aging. Join us each week to meet senior living experts and inspirational seniors who are following their dreams. The fact is, we're all aging, so why not do it in style? Hi, welcome to Aging in Style with Lori Williams. I'm glad you're here today because we have an amazing guest. I'm so excited to interview this lady. I just finished reading her book and it was excellent. I recommend it for everyone. I'm actually going to have a copy sent to my mom as well. But let me introduce her first. Her name is Catherine Esty, PhD. She is 87 years old, and she is a best-selling author, psychologist, a widow, a mother, a grandmother, and an activist for aging well. She's on a mission to dispel myths about old age and to end ageism, which limits and undermines the most experienced among us. And I love that because I am on board with the same mission. Catherine lives in a retirement community west of Boston, and her recent book, the one that I just finished reading and sending to my mom, is called Eightysomethings, a practical guide to letting go, aging well, and finding unexpected happiness. So welcome, Catherine.
Well, thank you so much. I'm just very pleased to be here and talking to your listeners and sharing some of what's happened to me that I think is interesting in terms of being older myself. And when I turned 80, it wasn't always that way. I was in kind of a funk. And it was sort of capped off when I took a small hike up a very small mountain that I had hiked up for 40 years. And when we got to the very steep part, I was with a bunch of my sons and grandkids. I'd fallen and I was kind of getting out of breath. And I realized I was not going to be able to make it up the mountain this year. And that was the year I was 80. And I was crushed. So I sat down on a stump and I thought, I am old. I can't go on and be, that I can just keep doing everything. I can't. And I just sat on that stump, and the rest of them all, except one of my sons, stayed with me. And we sat there while the rest went up to the mountain and had lunch. And they came back about an hour and a half later. And I, by then, had kind of knit myself together a little bit. But I really understood that at that moment that I was older and I just couldn't keep holding on to everything that I had held on to before. So that was a kind of a watershed event for me. And it took me a few months to get out of it. And that's when I found out. I started saying, well, maybe somebody knows how to be 80 and kind of do this well. And I started thinking, well, maybe I'll interview people and find out how you do this. So that's the start of my book, and also the start of me dispelling my funk and finding out that people in their 80s are really happy.
And I love hearing that. And I get what you're saying, that it was sort of the physical thing. You realized you just kind of hit that. Okay, I physically can't do, but mentally and everything, you're still the same person. It's just I can't climb a mountain like I did before.
That's right. But I did realize as I started interviewing people, first of all, that I found out, to my surprise, and then I started doing research too, and found out that people in their 80s are happier than people in their 70s. And then I found out people that are in their 70s are happier than people in their 60s. That I did not know. And yet when I interviewed 128 people in their 80s, and all but a handful were just kind of saying, well, the biggest surprise about being older is first that it's a surprise that you are older. We're always surprised by that. But the second biggest surprise is how unexpectedly happy they are. So it's kind of hard to really absorb because so many of us have dreaded being older. And, there are some transitions that you have to go through, and it is a piece of work too.
Yeah, sure. And I think, it is our culture that makes us dread getting older. Everything's about anti-aging this and really celebrating youth over people who are older, Which is crazy because we're all, God willing, going to get older. So, yeah.
If we're lucky.
Exactly.
If we're lucky, we get to be 80 and to be older. And that's one of the things I've realized too, that being in your 80s or being older is a privilege in a certain sense that not everybody, there are people that don't make it.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I find your research, what you did, so interesting. So you interviewed 128 80-somethings all over the country. And I mean, not just in your area, but everywhere from all different walks of life and backgrounds. So tell us a little bit about what you found about transitioning as we age.
Right. I found out that nobody gets through their 80s without having some major transitions. In the 70s, you started that some people have some transitions, but many people change households in their 80s. One of the major things is they downsize. I mean, I know I actually had moved before I was 80. I moved in my 70s, and that happens in the 70s too. But that was like a major thing. I had had 4 children, and so I had a fairly large house, but it was clear that my husband couldn't manage it any longer. So we had moved, and we decided he didn't want to move twice. So he said, let's just go to a retirement community. And so that's what we did. And he was in his 80s. He was a bit older than I was. But for me, that was a huge blow, a hard thing to accept for me. So as we were getting ready to move, I realized it was not only leaving my house and my beloved garden with its rhododendron, and it's a nice old stone wall, and it's a New England house, the old sort of colonial house. But it was all the things that were in my house that I couldn't take because we were moving to a smallish, it's actually a large apartment, but it felt small. The good thing we did that helped me get over my stuff, kind of having to leave so much stuff behind, is that we invited all my children and the grandchildren, and we kind of put stickers on what we were going to take. And then we just invited everybody to take everything else, but they all got a different color sticker because we were going to take it and sort it out later. And it was like a party. It was like a scavenger. And then I had so many surprises, when my granddaughter, who's in the military, took a bunch of very flowery salad plates. I thought that certainly didn't look like Julie, but anyway, people took odd things, and it was just fun. And so that was one of the things that we said to them, if 2 people want the same thing, the same picture, they should work it out. We weren't going to get into it. And
exactly.
In honor of my husband and me, they did it. So that was another kind of learning, but it is hard, and it's very hard to leave your home. But the big surprise for me was I never missed any of those flowery salad plates, and once you're in the new place, your mind just doesn't think back. The only thing was I'd given up maybe too many books, and I gave away a lot, but I brought some, and since I got here, I've been allowing myself to buy more. So you kind of get in a place in your life where you don't want more stuff, but I buy an occasional book.
Yeah, that's great. I love that idea to make it like a party and a celebration, and how wonderful to, instead of try to guess, okay, maybe these flowery plates would go to another granddaughter, you let people decide what meant something to them. And that was sort of a surprise, like you said, to you.
What they picked. It was hilarious. And now what's fun, I go to their houses. I was just down at a grandson's graduation from college, and I went to my son's house, and there in their living room were 3 pieces of art, from my house that my mother had painted watercolors. So that was just, it became nice now too.
That's
but
great.
Also, we talk about transitions. One of the ones I didn't expect was I used to be 5'6" 3/4", and now I am 5'3". I think I shrunk more than most people, and so I had to get used to being a smaller person. The first time said someone, Catherine, well, now you're a small person. I have always felt I was taller than average. I was so shocked, but that was one of the easier ones to get over. But I was in the hospital in June I had to have an operation. I had a blockage in my intestines and had to be operated on. And when I got back, the nurse told me I was going to have to be on a walker for a while. And I can't tell you how hard that was. I kept thinking, not me, I walk, I'm strong. And so I kind of said, okay, and I did it, but I was really reluctant, and I realized I needed it, and I actually fell again when I wasn't using it, so I learned a little lesson. So I think I understand that as we age, we do have to make accommodations and adaptations. And sure enough, I'm not on a walker now. I mean, with some PT, I got rid of that. And each change from your old style, especially when interferes with your lifestyle, is a kind of blow. And it's mostly pride, but
I was going to ask you, what do you think it is? Because we get that a lot where people don't use their walker. They really need it. And then they have a fall and then things, change and not in a way that they want it to, then they're really more disabled. So it's pride is what it comes down to, or maybe not seeing yourself as old. Like you said, it's a surprise that you're in your 80s and older.
Right. And that you can't do everything. I always thought, and my kids would say, my grandmother can do push-ups. They would. And so I was sort of getting off on being that grandmother. And I had to change it. Not the grandmother that played soccer with the boys. And now I'm a grandmother that'll say, let's go to the movies or something, that because of the pandemic either, but.
Sure. So that's kind of part of that letting go and
right.
Changing who you are. And then you also in the book describe it as a shrinking world. And you mentioned already about how you have become shorter. You've lost height.
That's one way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, as I've been in my 80s, of course, we've all traveled less because of the pandemic. That's it's kind of been superimposed on our way of life. But everybody in their 80s gradually, there's some people that go on cruises but many people travel less. And especially as you go from 81 to 89, there's a lot of changes there. And so it is a smaller world. And then many people have a smaller circle of friends and they kind of have some very close relationships. Now, if you come to a retirement community, as I did, I have lots of new friends too, because it's a good way to keep making new friends. And that's been important to me. But it's still, I spend a lot of time in this building. It's a big building, our retirement community. I don't, compared to my former life where I worked and would get in the car and go to my office and have an office and have a work life. I was head of a principal in a business too. And then I was a psychotherapist for 40 years. And I just actually retired from that this November at 80.
Oh, wow.
at 87. My practice had gotten smaller. It was like less, it was like a 1/3 of a practice, but I was holding on to my practice and kind of afraid to let go. And once I let go, I realized, it was time. And I was happier, less stressed.
And that's something also in your book that I recall reading about letting go of certain things, people who want to be on every board or, busy and this and that, and how in your 80s, you kind of step back and go, I don't want to do that anymore.
Except some people don't,
Yeah.
You're right. I think a lot of people that have good common sense. Aging is all about common sense and kind of being in touch with what's real and what's really pleasurable and not just holding on principle. I love this quote that I use all the time, which is happiness is letting go everything you think your life is supposed to be and celebrating everything that it really is. And that's by a novelist. And I just like that so much because it's kind of training yourself to adapt to what's real. So, but people resist. I'll tell you about one of the people I interviewed. Her name was Edith, and Edith lives in Ohio. And when I interviewed her, her husband had just died, but she and her husband had moved into a retirement community, and she couldn't get herself together to sell her house. And she couldn't afford to have two things going, an apartment and a retirement community house. And she said, I know this is terrible, and she says, it's just me. I'm in 4 book groups and I'm singing a choir. And she was just somebody who was trying to maintain her old way. And she said, lifestyle. She said, I sleep in the retirement community. Then I go back to my house and have lunch and work in my garden and maybe have a friend over for tea and have my book groups when they meet. And she said, I know that making me stressed out because I know this is not the right way to do. And she was the most resistant person I interviewed and living the craziest kind of life. And
kind of straddling both worlds there. Yeah.
Honey, a year later, I called her. I did a kind of check-in, and some of the people had found out she finally a year later, had been able to sell that, but it was like ran down her finances.
Oh my goodness. I know some other reasons people resist. And I know in the book you mentioned some people, it's mindset also. I think there was one lady you talked about, she moved in and it was just really like her attitude, like she didn't want to get to know people.
Right. Well, that's it. Some people are, and that gets us to attitude is so important for aging well. And there are some people that are loners, but I think that certainly one of the answers to aging well is to make new connections and stay connected to other people. And, there are people that just refuse to connect with anybody, but it's not good for their health. It's not good for their well-being. No, not at all.
No. Also, I loved how you identified the 5 groups of people coping with health issues. And I read through that list and I could picture someone for each type. Do you want to share a little bit about those 5 types?
Yes. And it ties in with what we're saying, because I was in my trying to climb this mountain, Cat Mountain it was, in the Adirondacks. I was holding on to who I had been. And that's one of the styles. So the styles that I talk about, there are people that deny. And that's also Edith that denied that she couldn't have 2 houses. I mean, it wasn't realistic and you can't have 2 houses in the long run. But the deniers just keep doing what they've done. And it's really dangerous because some of them deny that they have cataracts. I mean, I know a guy that he couldn't really see well, but he thought he knew the roads well enough so that he didn't need to read the signs. And one guy that was doing a lot of woodworking and had Parkinson's, and with those power tools, his wife was going crazy. So denying is really a very not good style to have. It's dangerous for people. And then there's the Stoics, and that's what I am by nature. I'm trying to train myself out of it, but Stoics are just keep going too, but they're not so crazy that they would use a power tool when their hands were going like this, shaking. But many of the people that or my friends were sort of brought up to be Stoics, and we kind of, just do what we have to do and don't often pay attention to our feelings. And when we really need to take a nap, maybe people keep going or they keep cleaning things when they don't need to. So there's deniers and Stoics. And then there's the people that are realists, and they kind of know what they've got something wrong with them and they kind of take care of it. And that is a very good lifestyle. And then I could read this. What is, you had the list right there.
The complainers. I know it's
the complainers. The complainers, and they're the ones that are very unpopular. In my world here, among my friends, it's not cool to complain, and people got sort of disappeared. With one woman here that it turned out there were also mean girls at our age too.
There is. Yep.
One complainer that, when she'd say, well, my daughter, that wasn't nice and she moved away, that wasn't kind, she should have stayed here. And she would tell us about what we didn't want to hear, her indigestion, her acid reflux, her arthritis. So I noticed that, when she'd go try to sit down at a table at dinner, people would say, oh, no, we're saving that for somebody. And they really weren't. They were mean. And so that's not nice, but that's complainers are not popular, and mostly the culture, I think, among older people is one of kindness, and
exactly.
Most, like 95% people are very kind and generous, but complainers are not going to.
No, that's tough to be around because it brings everyone down. It's just, you're trying to have a positive mindset and someone is complaining about everything. That's just, no one wants to be around that. And I get that. And then your other one was the worrier.
Oh, the worrier. I'm somewhat of a worrier, but much more stoic. But my husband was a worrier, and he would take his blood pressure every day and kind of thinking maybe something would go wrong. And he'd get a little runny nose. And even when he was fairly young, it was like an annoying, because I remember one time we had guests for dinner coming, and he took to his bed when there's just a little runny nose. But he was a worrier. And, and I think, and I kind of in my book talk about strategies, for dealing with each of these, because if you're married to a worrier, you can't just say, don't worry. That doesn't work. You can't tell someone not to do that.
No, so that just makes them mad.
Makes them mad. And it doesn't, exactly. So in the book, I give kind of steps for each one and help people to kind of realize that if they are married to someone who's pretty realistic, they're very lucky, because there's a lot of deniers around in the world, a lot of stoics that don't take care of themselves. But it is interesting, and that most people fall into one of those 5.
Yeah, they really do. So I thought that was very interesting. So tell us, you talk about what's on the other side of letting go and holding on to who we were. What's on the other side of that?
Yeah. And what makes it worthwhile? I think there is a whole wonderful life. On this side of letting go is stress, anxiety, and worry, and pain. And so if you can get over and sort of do the letting go, which has to be intentional and usually has to take some doing. But when you do, people find that on this side of letting go, besides the lack of stress, there's this striving that so much of us, we're all into so much self-improvement, so many kind of ambitions, thinking of our careers. And if people can get over to really enjoying their older years and feeling it's okay to be exactly who you are, and you don't need to keep striving, and it's learning to just be. And what they find is that it's a pleasure. And suddenly that people have had so little time to just say, well, what do I want to do? I mean, one person I interviewed and I talk about in the book says, what's great about being in my 80s, being older, is I can wake up every morning, not to an alarm. You don't need to get up for all those years that we've gotten up for kids to get kids to school at ungodly hours like 7 o'clock. And she said, I get up and I think, now, what do I want to do today? And often there's nothing scheduled, or she might have some meeting. She'll go to a coffee or something. And she said, when I think about my garden and my friends, and I kind of think, what do I want to do? And it's just new for me and a great pleasure. Yeah.
So you do the things that bring you joy, which is probably why those in their 80s are the happiest.
Right. They have time for it. And I think all the time, I think, especially for women, friends are always important in their life, I think. But people often say, well, let's have lunch. And yet people that had jobs, it's kind of hard to squeeze it in. And yet, as you get into your 70s and 80s, there's more time to schedule being with the family you want, your friends, and have time for tea, a leisurely, 2-hour lunch, a tea in the middle of the afternoon, all kinds of new possibilities. But there's other kinds of possibilities, too, on the other side of letting go. I mean, what I see is there's really a choice do I keep trying to repeat my life on the other side, or do I kind of create a new life and do some new things I hadn't done? And I think a lot of the tang and the real pleasure comes from doing some new things. I know I can tell you what I've done that's different. I never took classes at all. And now I take a Tai Chi class and I take a Zumba class, which was a wonderful. Both of them the Tai Chi is kind of meditative and soothing. And I do meditate now. But then I go to this dance class, which is just so much fun. The other thing is I have a new love, which is kind of interesting at my age, and a boyfriend. And he's one of the people one of the things he's done is he never did any art at all, but something got him thinking, well, I'd like to go to the art class. So he went and had never held a piece of charcoal in his hand or a paintbrush or anything. And that's his favorite time. So I think great. A lot of people find something new, and it's a respiriting and it's a revisioning. And it's, I think that this idea of embracing change, it's about the whole attitude toward change and newness versus holding on to what you owe. You're kind of like using your former patterns as kind of a life preserver. But once you find you can let go of that and see, that you're a different person.
Yeah. I think that's so important that people, because I think that there are a lot of older people who think, well, I'm just going to sit home. I'm not going to do anything. They don't realize that you can try anything. And maybe that falls into those personality types, the complainers or whatever. But even like my grandparents passed away in the early 80s or early 1980s. They were in their 70s. But I remember visiting them, and it was just, they talked about when they died, it was always, when I die, this is what I want. And it wasn't ever like experiencing anything new. Like that was never a thought. And I think people have come a long way since that time.
Yes, they have. But I think, in fact, sometimes when people get very down the line in the last stages of life, it makes sense to talk about when I die. But what I think has happened is we live so much longer. We have this additional 40 years. When I was born, the average person died at 65, and that's why Social Security was pegged at 65. Now, the average person is much closer to 78 or 80. That is what people live to. And so that means the other, like half the people live to, there's in their 90s and 100s. And they say that a good chunk of the babies that are born now will live to 100. And we have people that are 100 walking around this place. And
absolutely. And working with seniors as I have for 15 years, I can tell you, I recently moved someone who was 100 years old into independent living. And as I shared with you before we started the podcast, some of my best friends are in their 90s. Yes. And that's why I think it's so important to have you on and talk about this. And I've had other people in their 80s and 90s on the podcast just to show that we can still keep living life. It's just maybe we change. We can't do some of the things we used to physically do, but there's so many other things. And one lady I had on, she's 81 or 82 now, and she skydives. And she takes groups of other people up skydiving. And I'm like, that's amazing.
That's amazing. That is truly amazing. Yeah. I know. And the other thing is that, the research I found too, there's so much good news that the average person doesn't know. And one of the things is we used to think that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And that I had heard growing up that, every glass of wine you have, you lose some brain cells. So I kind of think if you get old enough, you'd have an empty head, with no brain cells left. But the fact is, we've learned, and this is actually in the last 20 years that we've learned that people can learn. The brain keeps developing. And so that learning is now a huge part of it. And lots of people are in these retirement communities where you can take courses and give courses too. And that sort of learning, this idea of lifelong learning has taken hold. But they also, what we didn't know 20 years ago is that the brain can heal itself. So if people have trauma and a stroke or something, that many people recover completely. I mean, we have this person that ran for Congress about a couple of days ago, and then he had the stroke the next day and he was fine. So there's many more. Modern medicine has extended our life, and our brains can heal. So that's really, we didn't really know that before. We kind of thought it was all decline, and people still in their mind think, you were talking about the culture, Lori, and I think we do have a culture of youth, and people try not to look old and try not to have wrinkles, and who knows how much money is spent on cosmetics, tons. But the other thing is that I didn't know, as a psychologist even, that the research shows that people in their 70s and 80s, their emotions are healthier in a sense that they have less anger, they're less intense, less worry, so they kind of people calm down and kind of mellow out. And I know as a psychotherapist, I've had some couples, and, couples in their 20s, they throw things and shout, but people mellow out and kind of make their peace with the world. So, and that is new too. We didn't understand that.
I think that's interesting because I'm closing in on 60. I'm just about a year and a half away from that. But I find that as well, that I am just much calmer. And I think it's all of like a point of knowing who you are, really knowing who you are and liking who you are, really achieving the things you want to achieve, and just, kind of knowing your path. I didn't know my path until I was, my kids were older and, kind of got an idea of what I wanted to do. But I definitely see that in my aging process, that I'm just coming more into who I am.
And you're on the brink with 60, as I've said, in that happiness zone. It's true. And you have found your path. And I do think that at every older age, you get the chance to be who you really are. When you're in the middle of life, middle age, young adulthood, many of people have jobs which they don't get to figure out what they would want to do. They have very little spare time.
Exactly.
And when we get my age, people, they don't want to have just leisure for their life and just playing, I think a false hope that you could play golf all day long or Parcheesi and bridge or whatever. People, I found that 80-year-olds are happiest when they have a purpose, and maybe they have a volunteer job, maybe they have a hobby that they love. but that people still need to be contributing in some way.
Exactly. And we've had several podcasts where we've talked about that purpose. Everyone needs a purpose. And I totally agree with that. I also think that the change over the years in retirement communities and what they've become are amazing and also lend themselves to people living better quality of lives, because these communities have all kinds of things you can do, like art lessons, like Tai Chi, like, learning to meditate, all these things where, maybe 15, 20 years ago, there was only bingo, there's
only nursing homes, which was for very sick people. It was that kind of the place of last resort. And a retirement community with independent living is more an alternative lifestyle. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And it's great because, a lot of people, as we get older, maybe we can't drive like we used to, maybe our vision or whatever it may be. And then that can be isolating if you're staying in your home. But in a retirement community, you just have to walk to whatever room Tai Chi is in or Zumba, you just go there.
Yeah, nope, it's true. And so you get a chance to explore what kind of roads not taken. That Peter, my boyfriend, never had tried any art. He was busy as an educator running a school. So now I think it's like a new frontier. So if the other side of letting go is a new frontier and new options and just the fullness of life.
Mm-hmm. And as you said, finding unexpected happiness in that freedom.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I appreciate you so much being on here. Like I said, I love the book. My mom is 82. I'm sending her a copy of the book because I think it's something she really needs to read as well as anyone. I think it's a great book for anyone, whether, you're my age and your parent is in their 80s. I feel like it gives you kind of a glimpse into understanding better what's going on with them. And in each chapter, I liked how you had like talking points, kind of like, if you're the senior, these are some questions to think about. If you're the child of the 80-something person, these are some things to think about and to ask them.
Yeah, people love the conversation starters and there's the tips. Yeah, tips for families. By the way, the book is coming out in paperback in July, but you can get it on Amazon. Sometimes it's also there's a Kindle where you can read it, but it is very exciting, this idea of it paperbacks. And I have a blog which people might be interested in on Age Well. It comes out once a month. Mm-hmm. They can go to CatharineEsty.com and get to my website and then just go to blog. And I have a whole series. I've done one a month and they're all there about aging well. And it's from a psychological point of view. There's more guidelines on finance and kind of the nuts and bolts of medical things. But what is kind of unknown to people is the whole psychological life of 80 people in their 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and what we're really like and what matters to us. So hope people find it.
And your website's wonderful. We'll put it out there as well because you've been interviewed a lot on podcasts. And it's just a great website. I mean, did you think at 87 you would have this bestseller book and be interviewed on podcasts? Look at you.
I certainly didn't. And I was in the New York Times too, and on CNN. So I got to be interviewed. I make it a joke. I sort of peaked at 87, but it wasn't. It's been a flowering, and I see that in so many older people, and it's just a very nice thing to feel that there is a sort of blooming continues,
Exactly. I saw your PBS interview too. That was excellent with Tommy Chong, and there were several other people on there. And then your New York Times article. So I read that as well. And I thought that was excellent. So you are definitely blossoming, as you said.
It's lovely to be here and it's lovely to be at the stage of life where I, like so many other people, can figure out what's the really authentic me and be it and just enjoy it. So.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you and having you on the podcast. And I think your book's going to help a lot of people as they go into their 70s and their 80s and know kind of what to expect. So thank you so much for being on the show. And we will put out a link to your website and where people can get your book and sign up for your newsletter and your blog and everything.
And thank you. It was a pleasure. You're a wonderful interviewer, and I've enjoyed it. It's been a wonderful time. So thanks.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you all for listening. We'll have information where you can, like I said, find Catharine's book, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.